soldiers were forced to surrender or retreat under heavy pressure. In the north, Russian forces made incremental gains around the outskirts of Bohoyavlenka, aiming to establish a stronger foothold in the region. These developments underscore the intense pressure Ukrainian forces are facing in the Donbass and adjacent sectors, where Russian tactics rely on a combination of relentless assaults and incremental territorial gains. On the other hand, Ukraine has maintained its focus on defensive operations, employing hit-and-run tactics and leveraging long-range precision strikes to disrupt Russian supply lines and command structures. The ongoing Western military support has provided advanced weaponry, such as HIMARS systems, which have been instrumental in targeting key logistical nodes and ammunition depots. However, the sheer scale of the Russian advance in some areas highlights the challenges of sustaining an effective defense across such a broad front. Moving further south, the Zaporizhzhia sector has seen limited but significant clashes as Ukrainian forces continue to target critical infrastructure that supports Russian operations. The focus here appears to be on disrupting supply routes to weaken the momentum of Russian advances elsewhere. In the Kherson and Mykolaiv regions, Ukraine has also maintained a strategic posture, aiming to consolidate defensive lines and prevent further encroachment. Despite these setbacks, Ukrainian morale remains resilient, bolstered by international support and a continued influx of military aid. Nonetheless, the situation in key areas such as Velika Novosilka and the Kurakov sector remains precarious, with Ukrainian forces likely facing hard choices about tactical withdrawals to preserve their strength for future operations. As we shift focus to the diplomatic front, discussions have increasingly centered around the possibility of a negotiated settlement. This marks a significant shift from the early days of the conflict, where diplomatic overtures seemed far-fetched amid the high-intensity combat and maximalist demands from Moscow. While talks remain preliminary and fraught with complexities, the mere acknowledgement of potential diplomatic pathways signals a subtle but noteworthy evolution in the broader narrative surrounding the war. In summary, the battlefield situation remains fluid and challenging, particularly for Ukrainian forces in the Donbass region. While incremental Russian gains continue, the larger strategic picture has not shifted dramatically, thanks to Ukraine's determined defense and the critical support of its allies. As the war enters another year, the interplay between battlefield realities and emerging diplomatic dynamics will likely define the course of the conflict in 2025. Offensive lost momentum, with neither side achieving significant territorial gains. However, both fronts remain highly active in terms of artillery duels, drone strikes, and sabotage operations targeting supply lines and infrastructure. The focus here seems to be on attrition, with both Ukraine and Russia aiming to weaken the other's capacity for sustained operations. The Russian capture of Kurakov and continued advances along critical highways such as the T-0406 and E-50 mark a troubling development for Ukrainian forces, as these maneuvers aim to encircle and cut off key supply lines to Pokrovsk. If successful, such a strategy could mirror the devastating tactics employed in Bakhmut, putting immense pressure on Ukrainian defenders and necessitating a strategic withdrawal to preserve their forces. The capture of towns like Sant Sivka, Stary Turny, and Dachinsk further demonstrates Russia's intent to secure a firm grip over this sector, setting the stage for a multi-pronged assault on Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, the situation on the Kupiansk front is equally precarious. Russia's persistence in establishing and expanding a bridgehead west of the Oskol River has forced Ukraine to divert valuable resources to counter this threat. While Ukrainian forces successfully pushed Russians out of Novomlinsk earlier in December, the renewed Russian crossing at Masyutivka and their advance on Verikna underscore the ongoing challenge. The inability to eliminate this bridgehead risks undermining the defensive advantage provided by the Oskol River, potentially opening up new avenues for Russian advances deeper into Ukrainian-held territory. Ukraine's military command faces the daunting task of countering these threats while also planning for future offensives. Their ability to hold key positions and disrupt Russian advances will be critical in maintaining morale and securing continued international support. Western allies have pledged additional military aid packages, including advanced systems aimed at strengthening Ukraine's defensive capabilities. However, The effectiveness of this support depends on timely delivery and integration into Ukrainian operations. The ongoing attritional warfare in the Zaporizhia and Kherson fronts highlights the broader strategic stalemate. Both sides appear to be conserving their resources while probing for weaknesses. This dynamic could shift rapidly if either side achieves a breakthrough or significant operational success elsewhere, such as in the Donbass or Kupiansk sectors. In summary, Ukraine faces mounting challenges on multiple fronts as Russia continues to press its offensive. The encirclement strategies in Pokrovsk, the bridgehead west of the Oskol River, and the attritional battles in the south collectively test the resilience of Ukrainian defenses. With the third year of the war looming, the conflict remains as complex and dynamic as ever, with no clear resolution in sight. The ongoing war in Ukraine continues to evolve with alarming developments both on the battlefield and beyond. Ukrainian commanders are raising urgent warnings about Russian troop and equipment buildups in key regions like Zaporizhia. Reports from officials, such as the head of the Kherson Military Administration, Perkutin, highlight preparations for a large-scale Russian offensive, including the assembly of 300 boats to cross the Dnipro River. Additionally, Russian forces are intensifying their attacks on the Dnipro Islands and targeting civilians in Kherson with FPV drones, signaling an escalation in hybrid tactics aimed at destabilizing Ukrainian defenses. Battlefield escalations and strategic movements. The situation in Kursk remains particularly concerning. Despite expending substantial resources, Russian forces have only managed to reclaim limited ground around Novoivanovka and Plekovo. Notably, there are credible reports that North Korean troops are actively participating in Russian operations, suffering heavy casualties in the process. Ukrainian President Zelensky estimated 3,000 North Korean losses, while South Korean sources suggested around 1,100 casualties. These figures underscore the deepening military alliance between Russia and North Korea, with the latter reportedly supplying a significant portion of Russia's artillery, mortar shells, and missiles in exchange for advanced military technology, oil, and financial support. In other critical sectors, such as Donbass, Russian forces continue to exploit strategic highways like the T-0406 and E-50 to encircle Ukrainian positions and disrupt supply lines. In Kupiansk, Russian efforts to expand a bridgehead west of the Oskol River have created a precarious situation for Ukraine. Although earlier counterattacks pushed Russian troops out of Novomlinsk, renewed crossings and advances have strained Ukrainian defenses, emphasizing the need for swift and decisive action to prevent a broader collapse. Economic realities fueling Russia's war machine. Despite facing stringent Western sanctions, Russia's energy exports remain a critical lifeline for funding its military operations. Long-term deals, such as the agreement between Rosneft and India's Reliance Industries, ensure a steady revenue stream of billions of dollars. This financial stability enables Russia to sustain its military efforts, reflected in a $145 billion military budget for 2025, accounting for 32.5% of its total spending. Such massive investment fuels weapon production, recruitment campaigns, and the manufacturing of drones and missiles. The Shahid drone plant in Alabuga, for instance, produced nearly 6,000 drones in the first 9 months of 2024, while missile production capacities for Iskander, Kalibr, and Kh-101 systems remain robust. Russia's December airstrikes, including the largest missile and drone attack of the war, targeted critical infrastructure across Ukraine, resulting in widespread blackouts and destruction. However, Ukraine has responded with its own long-range drone capabilities, striking military and infrastructure targets deep inside Russian territory, including Bryansk, Taganrog, Grozny, and Kazan. Broader implications and shocking incidents. The conflict's repercussions extend beyond Ukraine and Russia. On December 25th, a shocking incident unfolded in Chechnya when an Azerbaijani Airlines passenger aircraft was reportedly targeted. While details remain unclear, this episode highlights the unpredictable and far-reaching consequences of the war, with third parties increasingly drawn into its orbit. Conclusion. As 2025 begins, the war in Ukraine shows no signs of abating. The relentless Russian advances, coupled with economic resilience bolstered by energy revenues, have allowed Moscow to maintain its aggressive posture. For Ukraine, the stakes remain incredibly high, with continued Western support and innovative defense strategies critical to sustaining resistance. Both sides appear locked in a deadly stalemate, but the shifting dynamics of the conflict, on the battlefield, in international alliances, and in economic strategies, suggest that the war's trajectory remains anything but predictable. The damaged plane was able to reach the airport in Aktau, Kazakhstan, where it crash-landed, causing the death of 38 people. There is a widespread consensus that it was the Russian air defense missile that somehow confused the Azerbaijani commercial airplane with a Ukrainian drone and hit the airplane with a missile. This was the second time Russia had downed a commercial airplane since the start of the war in Ukraine. Long-range strikes are one of the main tools of asymmetric warfare conducted by both sides in this war. Targeted assassinations are another one, particularly for Ukraine. Ukrainian special services have targeted collaborators and Russian military commanders like that several times throughout this war, and on December 17th, the commander of the Russian chemical, biological, and nuclear defense troops, Lieutenant General Igor Kirilov, was killed by an exploding scooter in Moscow, a day after Ukraine charged him with the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine. However, while Ukraine has been successful with asymmetric warfare, its conventional warfare situation continues to remain problematic, as evidenced by Russia's advances. Russia's manpower advantage remains the biggest problem for Ukraine. According to the Financial Times, Ukrainian authorities have launched 60,000 cases against Ukrainian soldiers for desertion. The main causes are lack of rotation and exhaustion of soldiers, which indicates insufficient manpower reserves. BBC quoted a representative of the Ukrainian Chief of Staff, who said that the current rates of mobilization are not enough even to cover the losses. The manpower problem of the Ukrainian army often leads to discussions of the necessity to lower the mobilization age, which the Ukrainian government is reluctant to do, to avoid making the country's demographic situation even worse. Still, it is reportedly urged by Kiev's Western allies. Given Ukraine's dependence on foreign military aid, one may wonder if the Ukrainian leadership will eventually budge from their position on this matter. Germany remains Ukraine's second largest military supporter, and in December, they pledged 2 Patriot and 2 Iris-T air defense systems, 15 Leopard 1 tanks, 2 Gepard vehicles, 30 MRAP vehicles, dozens of drones, thousands of shells, while the German military manufacturer Rheinmetall will supply 155mm artillery shells. The United States, of course, is the largest military donor of Ukraine, and the Biden administration is scrambling to deliver as much aid as possible before the unpredictable Trump presidency starts. On December 2nd, they announced a $725 million military aid package consisting of HIMARS ammunition, hundreds of thousands of artillery ammunition, NASAMS munition, Javelin anti-tank guns, Stinger missiles, and so on. A couple of days later, Secretary of State Blinken stated that Ukraine would get $50 billion from the proceeds of frozen Russian assets. On December 7th, the Americans pledged more HIMARS ammunition, unspecified drones, equipment and spare parts for tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery systems worth almost $1 billion. On the other hand, Ukraine should not expect to get more ATACMS missiles on top of the 500 they had reportedly received, according to the New York Times. American officials told the New York Times that Ukraine has about 50 more ATACMS missiles. This is an unfortunate development for Kiev, since thanks also to the use of ATACMS missiles, Russians have been forced to relocate some of its aircraft away from the front line, which has decreased the frequency of their usage of very effective glide bombs. Other reports of foreign aid to Ukraine include the delivery of an unspecified number of F-16s by Denmark, almost $600 million from Canada for military and humanitarian needs, a pledge of 1.5 billion euros of aid per month from the EU, and 225 million pounds British pledge to support Ukraine's navy and counter-drone capacity. Diplomatic developments at this point. Momentum for peace talks is gathering with the warring sides and others with a stake in this war, making their positions clear. Zelensky has ruled out capitulation. And indeed, for all the problems Ukraine is currently having on the battlefield, the Ukrainian army remains a very capable force fighting for every inch of their land. but he has conceded that Ukraine does not have enough to get back their lands. Zelensky is seeking real security guarantees to make sure that if he agrees to freeze the war with Russia, Putin would not just use the time to regroup and attack once again in a couple of years. Of course, NATO membership is the ultimate security guarantee, and Zelensky has suggested a route whereby Ukraine would join NATO. But Article 5 would not apply until the end of the war. Trump's special envoy Keith Kellogg's purported peace plan has been reported in the media. It envisages the end of Russia's isolation by the West and the restoration of diplomatic relations. The idea is to encourage Russia into sincere peace talks by guaranteeing postponement of Ukraine's NATO membership for 10 years, by gradually lifting sanctions and not objecting to Russia keeping the occupied lands without officially recognizing Moscow's legitimacy over them. Ukraine will be motivated by continued military aid and bilateral security guarantees with the United States. If Kyiv refuses these terms, the United States may consider stopping military aid. If Moscow refuses to talk, then the military aid will increase. It is speculated that the hostilities will stop on the current front lines. It would turn into a demilitarized zone, which European troops may man to ensure that the war does not flare up again. So, in a nutshell, it looks a lot like the deal which ended the Korean War. The priority is to stop the war and make sure it does not happen again. Ukraine gets security guarantees similar to that of South Korea, and let the political resolution of the war be found at some other stage. The bad thing about it is that frozen conflicts do get hot again, so there is always a risk. But the good thing is that there is no more bloodshed, at least for the foreseeable future, without agreeing to Russia's sovereignty over the occupied territories or guaranteeing that Ukraine would never become a NATO member, let alone acquiescing to Russia's more ludicrous demands, such as forcing former socialist states such as Poland, Czechia, and others to leave NATO. But is Russia going to agree to these terms? At least, public messaging coming from the Kremlin creates considerable doubts about it. On the one hand, Russian media reports that the Kremlin is preparing its officials for an end to the war in Ukraine. The idea is to sell the control over the occupied territories and purported success in denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine as success to the Russian public. On the other hand, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has reiterated Russia's harsh demands, such as recognition of Russia's control over Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia oblasts, guarantees that Ukraine will never be a NATO member and Western military bases will never be established in Ukraine, while Ukraine is to accept Russia as one of its security guarantors. Moreover, Putin has reportedly also explicitly rejected the possibility of Ukraine's later membership to NATO. So, there are a lot of unknowns at this point. Will Putin accept American security guarantees to Ukraine? Given the recent Russian advances on the battlefield, will Putin accept the freezing of the war along the current front lines, which will really be a meager result for hundreds of thousands of losses suffered by the Russian army? Conclusion: consider recent claims about Russian losses coming from the West. Again, you may choose to think the ongoing war in Ukraine has taken a devastating toll on both sides, with staggering human and material losses underscoring the conflict's brutality. Estimates of Russian casualties vary widely, but according to U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, Russia has already expended over $200 billion on the war and suffered at least 700,000 casualties. Former President Donald Trump has suggested a figure of 600,000 losses, while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claims 198,000 Russian soldiers killed and over 550,000 wounded. Trump's envoy, Keith Kellogg, has stated that Russian losses are 5 times higher than those of Ukraine. While Russia maintains the strategic initiative, the enormous scale of its losses, potentially nearing 1 million, raises questions about the sustainability of its campaign. The heavy financial and human cost, coupled with the strain on resources and public morale, could eventually challenge the Kremlin's narrative of victory. Despite its vast resources, Russia's war of attrition is stretching the nation thin, compounded by economic pressures and its diminished standing following setbacks in Syria. On the Ukrainian side, the situation is no less dire. American media sources report that Ukraine has lost approximately 80,000 soldiers, while other estimates suggest even higher figures. Ukrainian military correspondent Yuri Butasov claims the chief of staff has reported 105,000 soldiers dead or missing to President Zelensky. Trump's suggested figure of 400,000 Ukrainian losses aligns with Zelensky's claims of 43,000 dead and 370,000 wounded. These contrasting numbers highlight the uncertainty surrounding casualty rates, but the reality remains clear. Both nations are paying a steep price. Equipment losses and the material cost of war, the conflict's material toll, is equally staggering. As of December 30th, 2024, the Oryx blog reports visually confirmed equipment losses for both sides. Russia, 3,662 tanks, 8,650 vehicles, 297 command posts and communication stations, 1,409 artillery systems, 448 multiple rocket launchers, 134 aircraft, and 148 helicopters. Ukraine, 1,012 tanks, 3,506 vehicles, 27 command posts and communication stations, 694 artillery systems, 80 multiple rocket launchers, 102 aircraft, and 50 helicopters. These figures reveal the massive destruction wrought by the war, as both sides continue to expend significant resources in a bid for dominance. The scale of equipment losses reflects the intensity and ferocity of the fighting, which has devastated infrastructure and left vast areas uninhabitable. A path towards ceasefire or peace. Given the high costs and ongoing stalemate, discussions of a potential ceasefire or peace deal have gained traction. Both nations are grappling with the toll of the conflict. Ukraine with its smaller population and extensive infrastructure damage, and Russia with its growing casualty figures and economic challenges. While the prospects for a diplomatic resolution remain uncertain, the mutual exhaustion of resources and manpower may drive both sides closer to the negotiating table. Stay updated on the war in Ukraine as the conflict evolves. Staying informed is crucial. For continued updates, ensure you're subscribed to our channel with notifications enabled. Your engagement, likes, comments, shares, and subscriptions supports our work immensely. For those seeking even more content, including early access to videos, exclusive updates, and private discussions, consider joining our Patreon or YouTube membership community via the links provided. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we'll catch you in the next update. Stay informed and stay safe.